Conflict between your true self and what someone wants from you can cause a lot of stress, and that causes illness. Plato knew this 2,400 years ago. What do we know about it today? Watch this to find out. Okay, start from this. Things happen. You react. But then maybe you ask yourself, is this the real me reacting? Or am I reacting like someone wants me to? Let's figure that out. 2,400 years ago, Plato had this figured out. More or less, he figured out how our brains work in the paradigm of interpersonal relations. Certainly, he used language and understanding that were consistent with his era. However, he understood the concepts that motivate humans, the concepts we are talking about. Plato knew that deep inside of us, there were three powers that drove us forward, powers that made us do what we do. He called them the three parts of the soul. Don't get too caught up in that word soul. This was 2,400 years ago. However, his three powers were reason, spirit, and appetite. He used reason to mean intellectual motivations. We still use reason to mean basically that. It is what the brain's frontal lobes do for us. Logic and, particularly in the last several centuries, scientific analysis. But Plato also knew there was a second part of the soul. He called it spirit. He didn't mean something metaphysical. He didn't mean a being who wandered around through the metaphysical aether. No, his spirit was much more like how we feel about something or a situation, our emotions. It's the same thing we are still talking about when we say our spirits are down. It is more personal. Spirit is having a self that grows up in like circumstances and then comes to have feelings about circumstances. In this era, spirit comes closer to attitude or personality. These two parts of the soul, as Plato viewed it, would correspond to our other and self in our SORD, SOR-DD paradigm. I'll explain that more in a minute. And, just to complete the picture, Plato also clearly recognized a third part of the soul. He called it appetite. He didn't mean it like being hungry for a particular food. It was closer to what we would now think of as reptilian motivation, that is, basic emotions. In our SORD paradigm, we won't talk much about this level. It is basic and biological. It is the part of our reptilian brain that drives us to eat, sleep, be warm, drink water, and so forth. These are important fundamental functions, but they are not central to our self-other dynamics. So 2,400 years ago, Plato understood. He knew that people had three voices inside of them, guiding what they do. Again, we are setting his view of appetite aside because that level of brain function is not our focus. For a more current perspective of these three voices inside of us, we turn to Freud. About 100 years ago, Freud was talking about the id, ego, and superego. He was basically restating Plato's observations, using an updated framework. Freud emphasized that conflict between these three voices was a major source of existential stress. Freud got into trouble because he focused on the sexual side of these stresses. We're not going down that path. So that brings us up to about 100 years ago. Then, during this most recent 100 years, there have been many authors who have again updated the same basic discussion under different frameworks. We will discuss many of these authors during the videos of this series. Well, I don't think we need SORD as just another framework. Rather, I see it as an opportunity to simplify things, an opportunity to get away from psychological jargon. First, I'm not using an obscure label or formulation that requires an expert to be really understood. SORD is an acronym, an abbreviation. It's not a whole new idea that no one has ever thought about. The relationship between self and others is not obscure. The dynamics and dilemmas of these relationships are what people live with every day. So I'm just trying to make this important subject a bit simpler and less dependent on interpretation by an expert. You will see that ultimately all of this is really pretty simple. We all want to be ourselves, yet we make accommodations to live in a society. those accommodations can end up serving us well or cause problems. That's the core story. Still with me? Do you want more? Okay, with all of that, let's return to today and the situations people face in daily life. People need to react to the events of their life, but which of our internal voices acts as the guide for those reactions? Who is in control? Should personal wants and needs be in control? Or should the internal voice of others guide choices of what we should do or ought to do? Again, let's be clear, both are important. Yet one or the other of these two voices will predominate as people react to the world. In some situations, it is best to listen to their self, and in some situations, it is best to listen to their other. And in most situations, a person should know who they are listening to. Evolution built us to put self as first priority. We are born to lead our life, but we also evolved to know we depend upon each other. We are a social species, so we evolved to have our other as a close secondary perspective. If we are in good balance, we are probably going to do pretty well in life, finding a way that works for us individually while behaving appropriately in society. On the other hand, early life can throw us out of balance. Chronic negative childhood experiences can push a person into what has been called narcissism or into what is now called codependency, what used to be called neurosis. Narcissism is too much self-influence, and codependency is too little self-influence. If someone is mildly out of balance, that can be within the broad range of normal. Personal readjustment might be the only thing needed to get back to a more comfortable lifestyle. Alternatively, if someone is quite out of balance, then work with professionals can be the best. In that case, the SOR-D framework can be very helpful to understand what professionals are doing. It can also help a person really understand if treatment is working. Throughout this SOR-D series, I'm placing the emphasis on how the mechanisms work rather than on labels. Labels often lose perspectives of unique human situations when their situations are translated to a label. Rather, by understanding the mechanisms involved and focusing on those, we can try to avoid the misunderstandings of labels. Finally, it is important to know that SOR-D imbalances develop because people, especially children, try to adapt to their circumstances. The basic core of what happens in self-other relationships are issues of adaptation. But an adaptation that happened in childhood can become a problem in adulthood. So, are we good with all this? Okay. Before bringing this to a close, I now have an ask from our audience. If this material seems valuable to you, then a like tells me I'm on the right track to help you find what you want. If you subscribe, that tells me the videos are going a direction you want to follow. And if you leave a comment, you can tell me what aspect of this video or self-other dynamics most interests you. I have a lot of material. It would help me to know what topics would be of most interest to people.